Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Book Talk with Kara. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to Nicole Miller, and we're going to talk about her brand new book, Until Our Time Comes, which I'm very excited about because, as you all know, I love World War II, have been written a lot of books set during World War II, but this one is really unique and special because it's set in Poland. And not only is it set in Poland, it's set with horses, which someday I always say I'm going to write a horse book because I grew up loving the Black Stallion books and just anything that has to do with horses. So I'm really excited to start talking about this. But before we do you want to take a moment just to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Absolutely thrilled. Yeah, my name is Nicole. I live in Southwest Washington State, on, about 5 acres with two horses, of course, and my husband and two boys. I have been writing since I was in the sixth grade. And so I went into a journalism, college major and ended up kind of bouncing around from event planning to now I do HR for a couple of tech companies and but I will always be writing, in every spare moment that I have. And yeah, Until Our Time Comes is my debut novel. It's been a really fun journey just to see that book grow. And but it's been something I've been writing for about the past 23 years. So
That's so fun. And congratulations, because there's something so exciting about that first book and having it come out and having, just that whole process. Every moment of it is just something exciting and something to really celebrate. So, when did it become real to you that you're like, oh my gosh, I am going to actually have this book come out into the world?
I mean, probably very, very recently. I mean, I think even turning in the manuscript and doing all the edits and all of that, it's felt unique in a lot of ways, but I don't know that it's actually truly sink in. Actually, maybe the first moment was when I saw it on the title on Goodreads. And it was there. It was on Amazon and all that. I think that was maybe when it started to sink in. Just because I think yeah, it's been surreal. So it's still the sort of pinching myself moment because it's been so long in the works and I'm just amazed and thrilled and so blessed.
That is so awesome because it's something to celebrate and just relish every moment of the experience. So tell us a little more about the story and how it became something that you were like, okay, this is the book that I'm going to invest all this time in. How did you first get that spark of an idea?
Yeah, so the spark came from this tiny mention in a biography about a stallion, an Arabian horse stallion, and this tells you how much of a nerd I am because I've always had horses and always loved history, and so I got really really into digging into horse genealogy and bloodlines and history and kind of the origins of all these different famous Arabian horses because I've always loved Arabians and had Arabians my whole life. And so I was reading about this particular stallion who in Eastern Poland in World War II was disguised because he was so famous at the time. And that kind of tells you, like what, pop culture was in the 1930s and 40s, that an Arabian stallion would be recognizable. But they disguised this horse to try to save him from being captured by the Nazis by covering him with mud and cutting his tail to make him look ugly or look like a farm horse instead of this finely bred stallion. And that like one detail, it's stuck in my brain and it just would not let go. And I, from there, just kind of developed a story about what if an American trainer was there and she was trying to learn more about the trade and she was caught in there when the Germans invaded and just what that looked like and kind of just built a story from there. And it took a lot of iterations over the years and but just that nugget itself has always been just caught in my mind.
I love it. And I think for all of us, there's that moment. And often it's a sentence here and a sentence there, and then they all kind of get woven together. And out comes this idea and this whole book that people are like, that came from a sentence that you saw in a book, and then it kind of spun together. So when I was writing a book that was set in Europe during World War II, Shadowed by Grace, like the hero was really easy for me because it was set with monuments men. But what became challenging for me as I was developing the story was what was going to be the career that was going to have an American woman right behind the front lines because I mean, it's a romance, and I didn't want to do the whole a GI falls in love with a local woman kind of thing. And so it became actually challenging to come up with what's going to be the right career. What was the thing that it became kind of that really important detail that you had to get right, or the rest of the story wasn't going to come together?
Yeah, I think a little bit was the idea of how would an American woman end up as a trainer in Poland, because it was a very rare industry for women in general, in the 30s. There's a few stories of women in the 50s and 60s that came up as trainers in the US and really made a name for themselves, especially in the Arabian horse show world.
Yeah,
And it's a very niche thing. And so I really tried to work on that and worked on the character's backstory of kind of maybe like what would have gotten her into such a prestigious breeding facility and all of that. And so,
yeah,
yeah, I really tried to work that out and make that believable. And, you probably know this too. There was a lot of market trends over the last, 20 years within World War II fiction of should it be set in the US or should it be set in Europe? And so I played around with that like through a lot of the just drafts that I've had of this story of, maybe she only visits there and then like comes right back. And then most of the
yeah.
story takes place in the US. And so it took a lot of honing and trying to figure it out. But I think it did come together. And then of course, once you kind of get stuck behind an occupation, keeping her there was easy enough to fit into the plot. So
Yeah. And then it's the, okay, now she's there. Now what do I do with her? And how do I, how do you get all the rest of the pieces to come together? But there's so much research that goes in to books. And even writing a contemporary, there's lots of research. But then you write something that's set in a different time period. And then you add another country. And the layers of research that get piled on top of it are just immense. So tell me about the thing that was hardest for you when you're thinking about writing it set during that time period. Let's start with time period. So, what was that rabbit trail that wasn't really a rabbit trail because you're like, I have to get this right, or everybody's going to know? And
yeah,
yet it took forever to
yeah.
find the right information.
Oh, I'd say probably the locations and the boundary lines in the 30s, and especially as the war broke out of
Yeah.
where was the border with Russia versus because even the maps kind of are
Yeah.
trickier to find and they're not very specific. And so it
Yeah.
was, how many kilometers was it from the farm to the Russian border, or,
Yeah.
how far was it from Warsaw to the farm? And so, a lot of Google Maps, and like overlaying historical maps and some pure guessing. There was
Yeah.
good US military records from a later part of the war that I kind of used for, again, later parts of the book. But even some of the military records were conflicting.
Yeah.
And so, like one person's report would be different from another person's report. And so a lot of it was really just kind of finding the like best guess between the
Yeah.
two and hoping that, readers understand that there's going to be some subjective math in there to some extent. But I think I spent so much time printing out and looking at maps to try to make sure that the details were right. And could a horse go this far in one day? Like there's even conflicting things around that. And what
Oh,
like how much
absolutely.
supplies they would need, all those things. So it was really fun because again, you can spend a whole day on just one of
Yeah.
those pieces by itself.
Well, and then I would think even if you're I hadn't even thought about how far could a horse go, but then you'd even be like, okay, so but how old? Like an Arabian that's 3 years old could go this far without breaking a sweat versus one that's 10 years old versus one that's 15. And just all those other functions and details. And there's going to be a reader who's going to be like, au contraire, you are wrong. And you're gonna be like, that's why I love author notes, where you can say, this is why I made the decisions I did. And yes, like slaved over these details trying to get them right. And I care about this, but at a certain point, you just got to go. We did the best we could. And the whole idea that, it's Poland. It was like devastated by the war. I mean, what the Germans did, and then the Russians come in. I mean, records are going to be terrible after the war, even if they'd had all that detail. I mean, they just got obliterated by two occupying forces. And so it's not going to be simple to just put it all back together. So then what was the most interesting or difficult horse detail you had to research? Because you've got the war, you've got the time period, you've got horses. I mean, good Lord, lady, could you have made this more complicated for yourself?
Oh, well, I'd say the horse parts were probably the easiest because I've been fortunate to grow up with them. And
Yeah.
so, like, and if anything, I had to really rely on my critique group, there was one horse person in the critique group, but not all of them were. A lot of them were totally unaccustomed to all of the terms. It was making sure that I didn't use too much jargon when talking
Yeah.
about the because it was so easy for me to just talk about colic, but like, what is colic to someone who doesn't understand? Like, why is it a bad thing if a horse gets sick, or why is it a bad thing if a horse's leg is injured? And understand,
Yeah.
saying that in a way that wasn't talking down to the reader, but like also just a little bit more approachable from that perspective. So
Yeah.
that was tricky. And then also kind of making sure I was tracking some of the details, like what the brand for the breeding farm looked like, and making sure that detail was authentic.
Yeah.
The current, it's still a very big breeding farm in Poland, and so they're gonna know if I get that wrong too. So all those little details was really fun.
Well, and just trying to find them and track it down, and that just yeah. So how did you organize it? Because I know that like every author has their own way. And if you don't organize it well, it becomes a nightmare when you're going through editing. And there are ways you can make it easier for yourself at the beginning and prove to your editor that no, I've already done my research. I actually know what I'm talking about. And like one of my favorite little tips was that I picked up very quickly, especially writing World War II, is I would drop footnotes or
Mhm.
comments especially when I was writing in Word, where I would just drop the link and I would be like, so that, especially line editors, I'd be like, don't even bother. Here's the link. I've done my research. I know what I'm talking about because I'm like, I am a history minor. I care deeply about these things. Don't second guess me. But I'm not infallible. So then if they were like, no, we still think you're wrong, or we think there's a better source, but I'm like, don't use Wikipedia as a source for me. Wikipedia is not a source. And that's just one of my personal biases. But that was how one way I would do it. Or I have, Pinterest boards and I do other stuff in other places. But how do you organize it? Because I would just imagine, especially with all the maps and things and trying to keep it all straight in your head. How did you do it? Especially if you're writing it over years and years and years.
I think that's the unfortunate. It's very messy because it was so
Yeah.
long. And so I've had everything from binders printed with information
Yeah.
that are in totes somewhere because I can't actually get rid of those things
Yeah.
to I used Evernote for a very long time. I loved
Mm,
clipping websites directly because then I would have that direct source or
yeah.
that direct URL that I could look up even if the website was down. I could use the Wayback Machine
Yes.
online and all those things. So I use that a lot. But recently, in like the last 4 or 5 years, I've moved to Notion instead of Evernote, and so I ported a lot of
Mm,
those things to Notion, and I love Notion and have just a bunch of yeah, all of those websites and notes and drafts and all of those things kind of in a digital filing system, which is really great, digital note-taking apps. So that's been my main thing, but I'm also still someone who will print things off and I'll put it in a spiral bound.
yeah.
I have a binding like hole punch so that I can spiral bind my own manuscripts and things like that. Just, ultimate again, nerd status, but it's
Yeah.
helpful too to see things on paper sometimes. And again, even those maps
Absolutely.
versus on a digital screen. So it's a mix of both things for me, but I try to also just make sure I've got that uh, digital website stamp in some digital form that I can search.
Yeah, well, and I think it's important to capture like when, because it changes, and that's what people don't always realize is you might have been on a site and then it goes down. Or like I was just updating a class at the university I teach at, and a website that has been great for 3 years, now that link doesn't work. And so I have to backtrack in to find another way or find a totally different case to create. And so, finding that like Wayback Machine or whatever, so that you can, because when you're researching a book, that's why I like to print it off, especially for like World War II and that kind of research where you're like, if it disappears, you may not ever be able to find it again, especially with that really niche detail that you're like, I have to have it because someone's going to challenge me on it. So, what was the most fun part of writing this book?
Ooh, I think there were a couple characters and pieces that I ended up like that felt more at surface level, kind of like just a tool of the plot, you know, in
Mhm.
some ways that ended up becoming a lot more deeper and personal. And so there's a young boy who plays a very pivotal part in the first, most of the book itself. And that boy as a character became a very pivotal like person, and then also started reflecting a lot of the like quirks of my own like children in a lot of
Oh,
ways. It was really fun to bring some of their unique voice into that, and that was a really fun thing to bring in again as that evolved over the last so many years. And so that
yeah,
was really fun, and I really enjoyed like my critique group ended up really loving that character, and so they wanted more of him and that sort of thing. And so that was a
yeah,
really fun evolution because sometimes the characters just do their own thing, and so you
yep,
just roll with it. And that was a really fun one that, again, that character became like such a pivotal piece of not just the plot, but like the main characters coming together and all these different things. So it was really fun to like watch that evolve. It doesn't even feel like it's in your hands anymore. And it just takes shape.
yeah.
It's wonderful.
That's so fun, and there's something about when the characters kind
Yeah.
of take on their own life, and you're like, I wasn't expecting that, but that was great and so much fun. And when that happens, there's just such an energy that kind of comes with it that is so much fun. And when you have children, I kind of learned this from Sarah Sundin, I think, when we did a collection together, a World War II collection, and hers was the one that had a child in it, and that was the one that won awards. And I was like, I will never write a book again that doesn't have a child in it. And so I do that a lot now, where there's a child, and it just adds a spark in a life to a story, because no matter how heavy the book might be, because I write a lot of suspense too, but you add a child, and it just, even when it's dark, like World War II, there's a little bit of life and joy because children just bring that. And so it's just kind of part of it. So what was it like getting the call that you were like, okay, I am now going to be a published author?
Oh, it was, I mean, it's just it, it was amazing. So my agent and I had pitched this in various forms throughout many, many years, and my agent's incredible and just, pitched so many different things, different manuscripts that I'd done over the years. And this one, again, like we tried so many times with this particular manuscript and kind of different
Mhm.
iterations and changing the setting and trying to kind of follow market demands in a little bit of a way, but also try to stay true to the story. And in this last time, there were five publishers that we knew it would fit with, and
Mhm.
after that, we were both sort of like, well, maybe then like it's time to look at alternative ways of getting the story out, which is totally fine. But like that had just been my goal, was one of those five publishers. And there were one in particular that I was really hoping for, and it was the one that we hadn't heard back yet from. And so, I got four of the five rejections, and they were lovely rejections. Like all of the rejections are close and near and dear to my heart of, like, oh, this is great, but just not now, or not right for our lineup. And it's like, okay, totally understand that. But this last one, it was, I just hadn't heard back yet. Like we'd sent it to them, like 9 months earlier or something. It had been a while, and so kind of assumed that it was a no. Just
Yeah.
really assumed that it wasn't there, and it was totally fine. But it was like the last one we were waiting on, and after that, I knew like it was just going to go into a different like phase as a manuscript and a different outlook. And so kind of accepted the fact, like I'd already started the like transition into thinking about the next mode and what it might look like to self-publish it myself or whatever that was. And so like when I got it, it was so out of the blue and just like not what I'd expected because I just
Yeah.
accepted a different path for it. And it was just an amazing match because it landed with Rachel McRae at Ravel, who also loves Poland and Polish history,
Yeah.
and it's like traveled to Poland many, many times. And so it was really one of those things where the stars aligned because it is such a niche World War II story of Poland and horses and this really like unknown piece of World War II history. And Rachel also was like, I didn't even know about this, and I've been to Poland multiple times. And so it was a
Yeah.
really cool thing to just really have that all connect, and for her to be so passionate about the story too. So I mean, it was just like one of those, light beaming down from the sky and the choir singing moments of it really just being at the right place at the right time.
I love that. And I think people don't realize how long the different stages and processes in writing can take. I mean, it is just this, you can go 9 months and not hear anything, and it's not necessarily a no. And that's crazy. I mean, it's just crazy to realize that doesn't mean that you give up, because all of a sudden, I mean, it could be that the editors are waiting for the right pub board meeting to bring it up at, because they know that they need to wait for the right set of circumstances. Maybe they just sold a World War II story, and so they've got to wait for sales to be like, okay, we're ready for the next one, or, who knows? But there's just this rhythm and process, and it's so slow sometimes. And yet readers are like, come on, we want the next book. What's going on? So what's next for you? Is this a standalone, or is it part of a series? Kind of what's next?
Yeah, this is a standalone. And so we're excited to see how the reception is, and go from there. And then from there, I have other ideas. Of course, all of my book ideas hinge around horses as a central theme. And so, it's just been such a big part of my life, and certainly will be kind of just ingrained in all the stories I write going forward, to some extent. So yeah, I have just a lot of different ideas, everything different time periods, but again, always centered around horses and romance and all of that. So yeah, I'll be chatting with the Ravel team later on and just seeing how these this launch goes and go from there. But I'm just really, really grateful to see like this one finally come out after again it being that really
Yeah,
original idea that gripped me so long ago. And so yeah,
that's
it's a
awesome.
thing.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And that's so great. And it's so exciting because getting that first one, so many people have the idea and they never get to see that first book in print. And so that's something just to celebrate and really be like, oh my gosh, this is such a gift. So when you think about writing and the book creating and all of that, and kind of what's going next, do you think that this is a book that would make a great movie?
Um, I think so. I would hope so. The true events that this book is very loosely set around was a movie back in the I think 60s by
Oh,
Disney.
wow.
It was a different take on it. It wasn't focused quite so much on the Polish Arabian horses, but it was more around the Lipizaners of
Hmm.
Austria and the white dancing horses of the Spanish riding school. So there's been elements of this that have been told, and there's certainly an emphasis on Poland in the first two-thirds of the book, but later on it kind of shifts to a little bit later in the war and the role that the US Army played in rescuing all of these horses. And there's elements of Patton himself endorsing this. And there's just a lot of really big key World War II moments that play into this kind of little known story. So there's certainly a lot of adventure. There were a lot of things that could have gone very, very wrong and could have sparked World War III in
Yeah.
that immediate aftermath of and at the end of the war. And so there's just a huge element of both the like big picture items, but also there's a really challenging human aspect of like what is the value of a horse in comparison to a human life, or are we talking about this as an element of Polish culture and history and art? The breeding lines of Polish Arabians have gone back thousands of years at this
Yeah.
point, and it's not just a horse that's pulling a plow. There's history and the history and the pride of the cavalry of Poland and all this too that's kind of woven into these horses' history. And so there's both a very like large, grandiose scale, but also a very like personal choice of, do I stay and try to save horses, or do I run and try to save my own life? So there's some tough choices to consider there, which I think are also really compelling.
Yeah. So, as we wrap up, real quickly, what's like the theme? Is that the theme? I mean, because it kind of sounds like it is, but is there a deeper theme, or is that not that that's not deep, but do you know what I'm trying to ask
Yes.
here?
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of it really wrestles with the burden of us to really help the helpless. And it's not even just animals and horses and all of that. Like throughout the whole book, it's helping the weak and the children and the helpless and those who are victimized by these outside forces. So a lot of wrestling with that and our responsibility to do so. So yeah, lots of big heavy topics there.
Yeah. Well, and it's just that's natural with World War II. And so it's part of what I love is we get to highlight all of these really amazing stories of people laying down their lives for others, whether that's horses or people, but the helpless in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's why we find it so compelling. Because then the question we ask ourselves is, would I do that? And we want the answer to be yes, but it's a real question because we are not challenged in that same way today. Not that I'm asking to be challenged in that way, but I wonder, and I think we all do, if we were confronted by that, how would we respond? Okay, so now for segue off of that heavy thought with a couple of very light questions. Tea or coffee?
Tea,
Sweet or salty?
sweet.
And for the last one, how do you celebrate when the book arrives in your house?
Oh gosh.
Because you
I
get to celebrate for the first time. So
I
you're going to have to think about it.
I need to think about it. That's gonna be my takeaway action item. I don't know. I know I need to do something. And I think it's just one of those things where it's still just like so unreal in some way.
Yeah.
So that will be my thing to think about for sure. I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of like holding the book to my chest and like sniffing it the way I love all like books, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's probably some element of that and just like running around with it and showing everyone and pulling it out of my purse at any given time. So
Yeah, I love that. Well, and that's one thing. It's a question I ask just about everybody who comes on. And the number of us, like yesterday, I was interviewing Shelley Shepherd Gray, and she's at 120 bucks. And she's like, I don't really celebrate. I just turn around and start working on the next one. I'm like, I know, we're so pathetic. And that's why you get an opportunity now at the beginning of your writing life to start a tradition instead of getting to a point and being like, I need to celebrate and I'm not good at it. So, yes, take it as a challenge. Even if it's just going to dinner or going to a movie or doing something that seems simple, it's something we're celebrating. So, make sure you do that. But it's been so much fun to have you on, and congratulations. It really is wonderful. And I cannot wait to celebrate with you when this book reaches the world because I think it's just wonderful. And I love the concept of what you're highlighting, Poland, the horses, just all of it that you're bringing to life. And I think it's wonderful. So congratulations so much. And thanks for coming on today.
thank you so much. I really appreciate it.